Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Diablo 4 talk. We're about to go into Season 7 and with that everyone has new potential thanks to the big balance changes and of course the new power system. The witch powers should affect quite a few classes with different damage focuses, so it could actually go a few ways for different classes. But what seems possible to be the best build going into Season 7 for each class, we're going to try talk about that. Starting with Necromancer, which is seemingly the top contender for the season, or at least one of them. That's because of the insane performance of the Shadow Bloodwave build in the PTR. There's a cool new unique called Kesami's Legacy, which means that you spawn 2 waves instead of 1, and instead of forcing them away, you sort of ram them into each other, under you, pulling enemies in with it. Now naturally, with some funky stuff going on with that ultimate and the scaling of the damage, as was discussed for various classes, it was getting a bit too much value in the PTR and they have addressed that a bit. This was in relation to the way that new effects are being introduced when you put 5 points into an ultimate skill. That encourages you to do that compared to Season 6, but that backfired with the scaling somewhat double dipping on multipliers and for many people, uncapped as well. Now despite the fact that this build concept has had that bug fixed, the cap still seems quite strong. Now as normal, when you run the ultimate shadow aspect, that turns the blood wave into also a shadow skill, leaving desecrated ground. Since it pulls people into one spot, the actual ultimate itself, that means you can stack up a load of effects on that spot for incredible damage. Whether that's stacking Corpse Explosion's Shadow Goop on that spot, stacking different desecrating ground, say a Blight Pool for the big multiplier of the damage there. It builds up the damage very quickly. You could also do stat stacking in an interesting way in the new season with a witch power called Soul Harvest. Using a skill with a cooldown, like Blood Wave, will increase your main stat by 3% per monster nearby. So you're stacking up a lot of enemies in one spot, building up a lot of intelligence numbers with that, which scales up your damage more and more as you wave spam more and more. So naturally, any build that's going to help you spam waves faster by using things like the fast blood aspect is going to be very logical, alongside classic aspects like Tidal to spawn even more waves in. You stack up the damage in a variety of ways, like leaning in on overpower and stuff like that. So it seems pretty damn insane, even if they have fixed the uncapped scaling damage bug, and I'm quite excited to give it a go. But you know, I still really hope that things like the new Blood Spear stuff works out really well. That looks like a lot of fun, so I hope the scaling on that can compete with it in any way. And I should also mention that the devs said on the recent live stream about the season that Minion Necromancer is going to be in its best state ever. So they clearly have a lot of faith in that build concept, but how is it really going to compete with something as strong as what Shadow Bloodwave spam looks like? We'll have to see. But let's talk about the next high potential, and that is for Barbarians and the Earthquake related build. This takes Hammer of the Ancients and turns it into a super good AoE skill, which is going to be amazing for Barbarian clear. Mantle of the Mountain's Fury is that new unique that creates a lot of this potential, meaning the hammer will also send out this seismic line. That deals damage and slows on its own, which makes it great for the ability. But combine that with earthquakes and it gets silly. If the line hits a currently placed earthquake, it will cause the earthquake to explode on the spot, instead of dealing damage over time, but instantly for all the potential damage it had, making it much more bursty. The earthquake does get consumed when that happens, so it's a kind of build and spend concept. The talk I've seen around this comes down to the amount of scaling potential behind Barbarian in general, how you can get these earthquakes to tick for insane damage, and then when you pop them, it's going to be like a nuke. What we saw on the PTR was already solid showings, but that was without, say, the witch powers and even more buffs coming in for Barbarian in the Season 7 patch. Hammer itself has had a straight damage buff, and also multiple aspects related to Quake have had damage buffs as well. Add in the ever popular witch power Soul Harvest, and you can start stat stacking strength to juice this to extreme levels. Again, that will work by using a skill with a cooldown, increasing your main stat by 3% per monsters nearby. Although it's true that Barbarian has the worst main stat scaling after the changes made a couple seasons back because they have 4 weapons, I really don't think it'll hold it back that much. You'll be able to create earthquakes in multiple ways, like using the Executioner's aspect for generating them after an overpower, or using ground stomps using the earthquake aspect. This means you'll also be dealing more damage when standing inside of the quakes you're generating. They also buffed the Fissures aspect, which means your earthquakes will deal up to 60% times more damage, and it'll be dealt as fire damage. So there's a unique helm called Ugly Bastard, which importantly means you deal massively increased fire damage as another way to massively scale this output. The list just goes on and on. There's lots of ways to scale this. So all of it should combine to extreme ticks of earthquake damage, rocking massive explosions as you send those lines through them. And with the nature of this AoE, it should work in unison for insane mob clear as well as single target. So I think I've underrated Barbarian's potential in Season 7 overall. I think they're going to be in a very strong spot with this build in particular. Okay, so that brings us to the next class. We're going to talk about Spiritborn, which is in an interesting spot itself. Essentially, Season 6 happened, and as we all know, Season 6 was the season of Spiritborn. So I think it was fair of us to assume that Season 7 would certainly not be the same, but you know, in the PTR, Spiritborn was doing very well. In fact, the devs called out directly that it was really solid, and they want that power level to be about where all the classes are. So, rather than nerf Spiritborn more, they're going to do very little for Spiritborn from PTR to Season 7, and that should give you some hope. But despite that, it shouldn't actually be performing remotely as well as it was in the PTR, because, you know, this was the build with the Razor Wings focus. That was good in the PTR because the new legendary aspect was simply really strong, too strong, combined with various changes they made to it. What the devs didn't seem to put across is how much of an impact the nerf of its overscaling should actually be. The bug with the aspect meant it simply didn't have a cap to its scaling, which was pretty incredible. With that now fixed and removed, it leaves us unsure exactly where it's going to land post-bug fix. What will Spiritborn likely be doing if Razorwing doesn't end up being that good? Well, more than likely, it'll be back to an overpower focused setup, relying on the classic Rod of Kepelecki, using quill volley just like last season. But yeah, that does mean even after all the nerfs, it won't feel remotely like a shadow of itself like we saw in Season 6. I think people have kind of had their fun with that build now as well. Something fresh like Razor Wings would be good. And if it continues to work well, like how they claimed there weren't big changes, it should still work as a strong option for the season. I do hope people that want to play Spiritborn no matter what then end up with something fresh and strong this time around. Next up we have Sorcerer, which actually has the most change from the PTR to season launch, but despite that, it's not exactly busted strong looking, because it actually looks kind of well balanced. It's just, there are other builds and classes that seem kind of unbelievably strong, where Sorcerer seems reasonable, making it look worse than maybe it is. And you know, part of the issue seems to be tied to what technically will be their best build for the season, which is the classic Shatter build. That setup is a specific awkward playstyle that allowed sorcerers to push higher tier clears in the pit than maybe they otherwise could or should. Through a combo of fireball burning and shattering, you're basically fishing for the right pit and setup that has the right boss with ads to allow for the setup to really work. So let's say you get a pit without that, you just leave and re-roll it and maybe get the ideal pit this time. It's like saying Sorcerer isn't weak, look, it can clear pit level X. But only in this specific scenario where everything lines up perfectly. This may make the class appear stronger than it is if you just look at pit clear numbers. So what do you go for real quote-unquote gameplay? Most of the gameplay is not going to be about pushing the highest pit tier possible. Well, there's a lot of returning potential for the Splintering Energy Lightning Spear build to be back. It had a key bug fix going into the season, which should have a huge impact compared to say where it was stuck last season. Compared to that, it should have nearly double the damage, which is of course a big deal, but when you think back to the peak of this, it'll be still weaker than that significantly. So right now it seems like that's the hopeful option for high damage potential outside of the whole shatter thing, but there is some vague potential for fireball, assuming that there's still that big bug with the bounces on its unique, which basically 10x'd its damage. And it's interesting because we expected them to talk about that on the live stream, or say especially in the patch notes, and we don't know if it's been addressed or not, so we'll see. Also, I should have mentioned that the devs highlighted a new potential Ball Lightning build using the new Ball Lightning unique for the season. Usually when they do that, they go out of their way to make it easy to try, with rewards in the season journey to help you use it. But yeah, Shatter still seems like the top build to push pit no matter what, which is, you know, what most people gauge power by. Moving on then, we should talk about Rogue, which is looking very strong in Season 7, with a couple builds in particular that stand out in potential. Firstly, we have the Rain of Arrows concept, which was of course stand out in the PTR. This was connected to the fact that at 5th level on ultimate skills, you get extra bonuses, and that resulted in multiple awesome ultimate builds in the PTR. Now, Rain of Arrows was improved in a lot of ways too, like raw damage buffs, speed at which the damage starts to apply, improved lucky hit, but unfortunately they've made it clear since the Season 7 livestream that ultimate skills are meant to be, as they say, flashy and fun, but the scaling was way too good for various ultimate builds in that PTR. In the case of Rain of Arrows then, the damage to distant enemy stat was applying to Rain of Arrows, increasing its output in a somewhat bugged way. The result was really good, but you know, compared to what we saw in the PTR with Druid, Necromancer, even Spiritborn, it wasn't that problematic, so it's a bit of a shame they touched it. Despite that, it should still be very good as an option. We're just gonna have to see how it turns out, because what seems also very promising is the long-awaited return of builds like Twisting Blades, which do look really good. A big part of that is going to be tied to the new way they've got the Shadow Clone ultimate skill working. They're treating it more like a minion, so the damage it deals will count like player damage, scaling off you. You're also going to be able to snapshot power into it from skills like imbuements, yeah, but also your raw power in the moment you're about to summon it. It seems to work as well for aspects, even unique effects, meaning you can get a lot of stacked up power from procs and other setup. So the Shadow Clone output should be insane for its duration. The thing is, that doesn't apply just to the sort of more melee builds, it should also work for rapid fire builds, or ranged builds in general. It's been confirmed that the Shadow Clone will benefit from effects like the Scoundrel Kiss unique ring, which means rapid fire sends out exploding arrows with that chance to fire multiple projectiles on a proc ray. The way it scales its output seems really high in potential then, opening up new snapshotting setups for multiple builds. So it should be a good time for rogues, because it's hard to say which one of those three is going to come out on top, which I think is a great thing in itself. But that finally brings me to Druid, where I fall a bit flat, unfortunately. If you're unaware, Druid was doing this in the PTR. Insane numbers that literally have minuses next to them. That's a pit 150, by the way, and every enemy is dying nearly instantly, which is a tiny bit strong. That happened because of a weird bug with the Survival Instincts passive, providing way more than it should, to say the least. But with that bug fixed, what's going to be the best option for Druid now? Well, it's a lot harder to know because of that bug. Even the build that was maximizing it could be really potent, say Boulder combined with the Instincts, but it just meant that the PTR time for Druid was kind of awkward to really get proper testing in. Now, there was also the potential of Shred builds coming in, which now benefit from the double rework Blurred Beast. That one was changed to proc more attacks based on how far you traveled on the Shred use, which is a silly concept in real practice because it's extremely awkward to fully trigger that range every time you're trying to use the skill. So instead it's been reworked again to have a chance to proc the extra attacks whenever you just use the skill, as it really should be. Therefore, Shred builds have new reliable options to increase damage as a consideration, and in the past, poison related Shred stuff was strong, and those builds look potent in this season. Now, having said that, there's still other potential, like Hurricane, thanks to a Witchcraft power coming in, Force of Will, greatly improving the damage of your next overpower. So when you kill something, your next overpower deals % increased damage, up to 100%. At rank 4, that damage bonus extends beyond the next overpower, but instead to the next 2. You could increase the duration of these charge-up hits, snapshotting their strongest form to also last as long as possible. So, pretty cool concept there too. Not to mention there's a potential return of the Cataclysm Druid. But yeah, I just feel like I can't really give you a clear answer for Druid, only what the current insight is. And with that crazy bug in the PTR, Druid builds simply need some real testing, so we're gonna have to see how it goes in Season 7. But there you have it. That's my overview of each class and the information about potential top builds going in to Season 7. I hope that was useful, or at least interesting, and you can expect a lot more coverage of the season as we get into it. For now then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.